All right. Welcome, everyone, to the first installment of 2021 Leadership Seacoast's series on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Last year, around the same time, when our worlds all collectively changed, we decided as an organization that it was really important to have these conversations and not just have them amongst our LS friends and alumni, that we really wanted to open this up to the community and have these conversations community-wide. So we started this last year. We had then made a commitment to continuing to do this for every quarter for 2021. So this is the first one of this year. And who knows, maybe at some point in the not too distant future, maybe we could even do this in person. Like, wouldn't that be exciting again, to go to an actual space and see each other in person, not just our faces? But anyway, I just want to thank you for being here, for taking the time out of your day to hear from the panel of experts that we have convened to talk about a brave space to have a conversation about race. Before we get started, I just want to give a special thank you to Cambridge Trust. Cambridge Trust is the sponsor of this event today, and we have Rachel Ela, who is Vice President with Cambridge Trust and also a Leadership Seacoast alumni of the class of 2014. Rachel is also just a phenomenal person that is involved in so many things. I know she was the board chair of the Exeter Chamber. She was president of the Exeter Rotary Club. She has been involved in numerous nonprofits boards. So she is a true community leader, and we thank you and Cambridge Trust for sponsoring us. And Rachel, I'll let you say a few words.
Thank you so much, Lori. Yeah, I'll start with the prerequisite for any LS conversation is I am a part of 2014, the best class ever. Nicole, I see you. Yeah. So it has been such a pleasure for me personally to be a part of the LS community and the continued programming. Cambridge Trust is a proud supporter of Leadership Seacoast and programs like Brave Space to talk about race. Leadership, one of the best things that this program does is to create safe spaces to really get in deep with important conversations like this. Cambridge Trust, for those of you who don't know us, we are a private bank that offer a full array of services for personal and businesses, and that includes lending, deposit services, as well as wealth and trust services. DEI efforts mean a great deal to Cambridge, and we show our commitment in a variety of ways. In 2020, we are proud to have donated $100,000 to organizations that focus on social justice and racial equality. We also supported the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire with a donation of $100,000 via tax credits. We are ranked as #1 in the US by NASDAQ, of all companies on NASDAQ, as having the most women on a corporate board. We are also named as one of the top 15 corporations to have one of the most diverse boards in the Boston area. And then lastly, we talk the talk, we show up with our checkbooks, and we also walk the walk as well. So we also have an incredibly engaged employee-led DEI committee at the bank that sponsors conversations and programming very similar to what we're about to participate in. We also do volunteer days that benefit corporation or organizations that benefit Black and Brown communities. So I personally am so excited for this programming. Thank you for the opportunity to support. And Lori, I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. So we're going to quickly dive into this, but I just wanted to start by giving a big kudos to our panelists. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at who they are and the experience and knowledge that they come to you today with. Jermaine Moore is with the Mars Hill Group. If you've not, if we were in a room, I would have you all raise your hands and to say who has not heard of Jermaine Moore, because there's probably not many people that haven't heard of him. He's doing phenomenal work in this region for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also has a really great business that he operates to do some coaching. We also have Michelle Holt Shannon, who is another fantastic leader in our region. She is with the Carsey Institute and is with New Hampshire Listens. I don't know if you've ever heard of that organization, but they do a lot of work around deliberative dialogue. We also have alumni Rob Sapiro on the panel today. He is the administrator with Baha'i Learning Center, and they do some phenomenal work around exactly what we're talking about today. And he's also an alumni of Leadership Seacoast 2018. And lastly, but not least, we have Latanya Wallace, who is a graduate of the Leadership Seacoast class of 2020 and works with Banker Savings Bank. She's an all-around amazing human being who has started at least one nonprofit. I think she's starting a second potentially, and is another amazing community civic engaged leader. So thank you all to the panelists for being here today. And I'm going to just quickly pass the baton over to Jermaine to get this started.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Lori. And I'm so excited.
Oops.
Myself. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Very good. So just so excited to be with you all tonight. I obviously have a ton of passion for this work, and I believe this work begins with times like tonight, where we can have a safe space where we can have discourse when it comes to these very, very important issues. I don't know about you, but when I look around our communities and our country as a whole, we've just lost the ability to have tough conversations with one another, or at least engage in talking about some very difficult things. So this is a way that we can model that behavior. If we can do it, right, we can start to show others how they can do it as well. But having these conversations well is not necessarily an easy thing to do. So there are some guidelines and ground rules that I want to share to help these conversations go as smoothly as possible. Because I think these are courageous conversations. They're conversations where we feel a little bit of fear, a little bit of anxiety in having these conversations, because we're not used to, one, talking about these things in such an open forum, maybe with our circle of trust, maybe with the friends that we're very, very close to, but not necessarily with strangers. And so I want to make sure we set this up well. So a couple things for you to keep in mind. Be fully present, right? We have 2 hours together. Let's be here, be where our feet are, and just fully embrace everything that's happening during these conversations. We want to approach these conversations with respect. I think it's so very, very important. Respect for different perspectives, respect for where people are, not necessarily where we think they should be, is very important. Of course, we want to have empathy, strive to connect with each other emotionally and cognitively. Put aside any preconceptions that you have, be open to learning something new is very important. Embrace that discomfort of not knowing. I'm a big believer that the transformational learning comes when we're out of our comfort zone. So if you feel a little bit uncomfortable, don't shy away from it. Lean into that discomfort. That means this is working. That means this is good stuff. So if you feel uncomfortable, don't run. Lean into it. Fully embrace it. Be courageous, and I think you'll find you'll get a lot out of it. Listen and be open to questions. Listen to understand, not just to respond. Trust intent and acknowledge impact. If there's two rules that I would say, if there's anything you hold on to, is trust intent and acknowledge impact. Can anybody share what it means to trust intent and acknowledge impact during these conversations? Anybody have a guess what it means to trust intent and acknowledge impact?
Yes, I will say something.
Yeah.
I'm Olivia. I'm from the class of 2010, and I'm a current board member of Leadership Seacoast. I would say trusting intent is that these, the intentions of the words that we share are not intended to hurt people or intended to sound ignorant or like we don't care the impact that they have, but that they're literally coming from a place of wanting to gain knowledge or understand or seek clarity. And then understanding impact is that these words that we may share may impact one another in a way than we were unaware of, and maybe it's an important thing to share those impacts so that we're aware of how those things land on the other side.
Olivia, absolutely phenomenal. Exactly. If we have two ways to take someone's comment, they're coming from a good place, they're trying not to, they want to learn, they're trying to share perspective, they're not trying to hurt us, they want to build us up, or they're coming from a bad place, they're trying to hurt us, they're coming from a, they're trying to tear us down. We're going to trust each other that we're coming from a good place. Acknowledging impact doesn't mean that that even if they do say something, if they didn't mean it, it still may hurt us, it still may cross the line. So it's okay that we acknowledge impact. At that point, your intent does not make a difference. Whether you meant to hurt me or offend me is not important anymore. We have to move towards healing. So if we find ourselves crossing the line, we'll acknowledge it, we'll apologize, we'll learn from it, and move on. Speak from the I perspective, accept the speaker's viewpoint as true for the speaker in the moment, and expect and accept non-disclosure. So it'd be nice if every time we have these conversations, we can wrap it up in a neat bow. But sometimes that just doesn't happen. We just may not always see eye to eye. And that's okay. The important thing is we are engaging with one another, and there's learning there. That's how I'd love for you to show up today. And if we keep those guidelines and ground rules in mind, I think these conversations are going to go well. Any questions about that? Awesome. Should I set up the next thing?
You go, Jermaine.
All right. Good stuff. So now that we know how we're going to show up, this is what I want us to do. We're going to leverage the power of breakouts. Probably the most, really some of the most impactful things that we can do as we're gathering in large group is to break up into small groups and have some conversations. So our first breakout, we're going to ask the question, what comes up for you as you engage in difficult conversations? What are some of the emotions that you feel? What were some of the things that you keep in mind as you try to have these conversations? So let's break up in small groups. Am I on point, Lori? Yep. And let's talk about it. What makes these conversations kind of hard to have for you?
I'm really looking forward to hearing from each of you. What are some things that stuck out during those breakout rooms for you?
I'll go first because then I won't be nervous.
Hey, Lisa.
Sure. For me, one of the things we just talked about was a short story, an incident that just happened to me recently. I was trying to share this event, and as I was sharing on social media, I'm typing the description of what's important, right? Like, I want my friends to come. This is awesome. And it's not just cool because it's leadership. I was starting to type like, this is really an important issue that impacts all of us in the community. And then I stopped and said, well, it impacts me differently, but it impacts our community. And I was like stumbling over the words, trying to get it right, because I didn't want to say something I didn't mean, or that was offensive, or that I was misrepresenting who it's important for. And like, we were talking about how sometimes like you spend so much time just wanting to do the right thing, and you're so nervous when you type it. It's one thing when you say it in person and people go, you picked the wrong word, but we know your intent, right? So back to the intent conversation. When you type it, you're so much more aware of, oh, if I really do this wrong, people are going to think I mean one thing and I really mean something completely different. We talked about, sort of that interpretation and that trying to be aware and trying to be thoughtful about what you do. It was an interesting conversation.
So I'll go next, just to come off of the whole conversation around impact versus intent. One of the things we were talking about is, two people shared that they were concerned about not being misunderstood, very similar to what you just said, and coming across as wanting to make sure that intent was understood. And so I shared, for me, it felt like it was on the other side of the coin, that for me, I'm afraid of impact. I'm afraid, one of the emotions that comes up for me as a minority is I can get hurt in this conversation. And intent is all well and good, but the impact is still very real. And feeling that the onus is on me to accept that your intent is good, but where is the onus on everybody to recognize the degree and the hurt of impact? So it almost feels like I have more responsibility. And I say that, of course, in the loosest terms, the big I, you know, but where it always feels like the minority, and not just race, across the board, have more responsibility to understand that the other person has good intent. And the responsibility doesn't seem to be reversed to understand that, well, the impact is just as equal. So that was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think to build on what Angel just said, I think I was looking at it more from a broader scope about kind of doing some self-reflection about how I was raised growing up in New York, really having groovy parents, not judging anyone for who they are, regardless of walk of life, sexual orientation, color. So not only being an arts advocate, I'm really trying to make people self-aware of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access when it comes to even closing the gender gap in the art world also. But I think we also touched on the idea of having this non-judgmental approach, but also having a sense of vulnerability and honesty about trying to communicate that, and then hopefully having the person perceive that communication and that dialogue in a very positive way without being sensitive, or us being sensitive. So I think the whole idea is it's a lifelong journey too. I think it really is. It's not something that just happens overnight. Something that you have to take to heart and be cognizant of at all times, especially in the world that we're living in right now. It's more important now than ever.
I think for me, one of the things that I shared too is just the need to check my own bias at the door. And, you know, I have reverse bias of certain things, and just a great appreciation for friends of mine who are willing to call me out on it when I make comments that are, you know, challenge other groups in a way. So that's one of the big things that I've been working on, is trying to check my own bias and recognize that.
Thank you.
Some awesome comments. Can I share a perspective on some of the things that was said? I worked with many organizations over the last 8 months or so, and companies, when the whole George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, when all this was going on in 2020, they struggled because they were like, should we say something here? Should we make a statement? What is our role in all of this? And I found that companies took different approaches. Some people spoke up and some did not. And the reason that they didn't speak up primarily was some form of fear, right? They feared of saying the wrong thing, stumbling over the words. They feared about a fear of how their constituents would respond to these kind of conversations, and or a fear of saying the right thing, but now they're accountable to say, because now they said it, they're going to be asked, what are you going to do about it, right? But the companies that were courageous, and what I really encourage you all to be, is that these conversations may never feel comfortable for you. You may never feel without fear in having them. Let me tell you something, you are going to stumble. You are going to say the wrong thing. You are going to use the wrong words. You are going to step on toes. But it's more important that you have them, that you face that fear and do them anyway, because there's a cost to not having these conversations, right? So sometimes we ask the question, well, what'll happen if I have these conversations? Well, the most important question is, well, what's going to happen if I don't have this conversation? What happens if I don't speak up? What if I don't engage in some of these things? So Lisa, I appreciate like what you were saying about just like I worried about, am I going to say the right thing? Is it going to be received well? My encouragement is to do it. You're going to learn, you're going to stumble. It's not always going to be comfortable, but they're hard conversations that need to have, so that need to be had. So just a bit of encouragement. And Angel, I feel you. I feel you. Really, when it comes to impact and feeling like, oh, the burden is on us. But I find that most people don't. Their intentions are positive, and when they do step on toes, they're willing to learn from it and say, all right, my mistake. I didn't mean to do that, and how can I get better? So it's just kind of the station that we're in sometimes, unfortunately, to be able to, the burden is on us sometimes to let people know like when the line is crossed, unfortunately.
But I will just add to that and say, Angel, you already, and it's like what? It's like 30 minutes in, you've already taught me something, which I think is like so helpful, because I like to think of myself as aware, and I don't think I ever thought about, and I just said this in my breakout group, like my biggest fear is upsetting someone. I'm a middle child, and I just like want everybody like, I see your point, and like the whole plate spinner crap. But like, I just hearing that from you just made me realize, if I'm going to say that, I also want to couple it with saying, but it's not your responsibility to take care of my feelings. And like, so that's just like really, really helping me already be like, oh, because the last thing I want is for anybody that I'm having these conversations with to feel like they need to tamper their sensitivity, their disappointment, their pain, because I need those things to be there to learn from them. So I just like, wow, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. And I think, if we can get to the place where we recognize on both sides intent is positive, right? So even if I am sensitive or hurt or whatever word you want to use there, it's still framed within the context of positivity. It's still framed within that place of we all want to move forward. We all have a common goal, and it is equity and inclusion. And so recognizing that there is that give and take and there's compromise. But Olivia, that means a lot to me for you to say that.
Thank you.
Can I bring up something from our conversation? So Dawn and I were speaking, and one thing that was kind of brought up is how when we're having these difficult conversations, sometimes the person on the other side say, I'm speaking with my mother, who is also not in the minority generally. And I'm someone who tries to be very open. And an important line in a book that I was recently reading called How to Be Anti-Racist, it was worded that no one is ever going to be 100% anti-racist. We can only strive to be anti-racist. The more work you do, the more conversations you have, the better off it'll be. So when I try to have those conversations with someone who's not as understanding or as receptive and wants things to stay the way they've always been, that one line, why can't they stay the way they've always been? It irks me to no end. So my emotion is like, what in God's name are you thinking? Like, it can't stay the same. These people are not complaining. They are oppressed. And so I have to kind of like, kind of roll myself back down from like being angry, because if I'm angry about the conversation, they're not going to hear a single word I'm saying. So that is probably the most difficult part for me. And also when I'm having these conversations, sometimes as a white woman, I'm like, can I have this conversation? Is that okay for me to have? So I question that sometimes, and making sure that what I'm saying when it's said as a white woman, that it is a positive thing, that it's coming across in a positive way, that it does show my love and support for my fellow human beings. So that was just one thing that I wanted to share.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I want to chime in on that because as another white woman, two things that you said that made me think of, one is that, wanting to choke people we're talked to. I'm most likely wanting to choke my own family members, so that it's a little harder when I talk to my own family. And so I've had to come up with other strategies for that. But I do think that, and I'm a middle child too. Who else was the middle child over here? I have had to really think about, like, why did I feel like white people couldn't chime in on this conversation? And I've realized that I was taught that race and racism is about other people, that it doesn't have anything to do with white people. And I was taught not to see a whole bunch of stuff, and there's a bunch of learning and unlearning to do. But I think that's one of the ones that is a pretty fundamental one. It's like, I'm a big believer in affinity work. I do things where white people get together to unpack some stuff so we can show up better with our friends and colleagues of color. And I think learning, like, to problematize us, not the groups of people, we've been taught to think like that. A lot of us have been taught to think like that. And so you made me think about that when you were talking. But yeah, I'm a white woman who grew up in Alabama, in a very racially diverse place that was very socially segregated. And I absorbed all the stuff, and when I moved north, I thought I could live, I was naive enough, I was young enough to think I could live somewhere where racism didn't exist or wasn't as strong. And then from there, I kind of started a journey of realizing, oh, this is everywhere. I've been taught a lot of wrong things, and I make mistakes every day. And I've been talking and having and hosting conversations about race for 20 years or more, and I screw up regularly. And I think it's only because I'm older, been on the planet for a little while, that I feel like I can ride that roller coaster. When I was younger, I would have been devastated. And I really, like, I love the way Jermaine set us up, because especially when I was younger and feeling even more vulnerable and less informed, I guess, I needed that kind of a setup. I still do. But I'm also more comfortable with admitting my own biases, like some of you have said as well. So I relate.
Yeah.
Relate as a white girl.
I think it's also important. There's something someone said to me that really struck a nerve, and I'm sharing with you, and I hope you take it the right way. So racism is often seen as, first, now talk about racism, and we can apply this to any other identity, marginalized identity. But racism is often seen as a Black problem, but it isn't a Black problem. It's a white problem, actually, right? It's your issue, right? that you have to work on. Like, now, of course, we feel the effects of it, right? We were oppressed because of it and discriminated against. But it's like, if you have a relationship and there's a married couple and there's an abuser, and the person who is abused, like, you can't go to the abuser and say, this is we got to fix, you have to fix this, or this is something that the onus is on you. No, we go to the person who's perpetrating the wrong, and we say, we got to start here, right? We got to stop this. Somehow the narrative has been like, this is a Black problem and this is not our problem, but it isn't a Black problem. It's a Black issue, but the root of the issue doesn't sit with this community of Black folks, right? Because they're not the ones perpetuating this horrible, evil thing, right? So although they're the victims. So, and I'm not saying that all Black people are victims. I'm saying they're a victim of this behavior. They're typically on the other end of that. So even just how we frame it, because even as I work with companies around here, to them it seems like it's such a faraway issue, and helping them realize this isn't far away. This is happening right here, and it's a very real issue. Is eye-opening to some.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, and I think one of the things that I continually sort of am learning about is how do I, as a white man, take responsibility for these things, and how does the onus of responsibility for impact become mine, right? Because that's really what my job is with solving this, and beginning to feel the weight of the responsibility over time of being a white person in this society, and what is it that how can I take the inner transformation I need, but also begin to have that transformation within the context of family, or within the context of the workplace, or within the context of community? And what's my responsibility? It's always there. So I feel like that issue of taking on that responsibility it's been something that's been really helpful for me with trying to keep engaging in these things. And also then having responsibility, that means I have a constant driver to learn, right? You know, if I'm responsible for this, I have to continue learning. I'm going to, you know, and as painful as making mistakes are, I have to keep figuring out, how do I learn? Like, okay, so yeah, I made a mistake. Absolutely. Like, you know, so then I don't want to do that next time. So what am I gonna learn about? How am I gonna change my behavior going forward? So I feel like that really helps. And then that's sort of the other part that I heard in the conversation too, that being afraid of saying the wrong thing. You know, I think society trains me as a white man to have answers to anything, right? I mean, that's like, I'm supposed to have an answer to any particular question, and or certainly the ability to go on and on about it even if I don't. One of the things, and that comes from that sense of superiority that is sort of inculcated, which is not real, but it's that sense of superiority that's inculcated. And I think that can be a big hindrance to learning. If I think I have to know, I've had to give up being in the knowing mode and move into the learning mode when it comes to having difficult conversations.
I mean, and what I keep hearing is that it sounds very much like it's a personal journey, you know, for each of us, right? Where, you know, there is always going to be that constant need in your life where, you know, gaining an understanding of truly who you are to the core, and taking that time to invest in that knowledge for self, but consistently doing that, right? So it's an everyday thing. It's not something that just, you know, you read a book and you're an expert. It's something, it's really truly being self-aware constantly. And, you know, I'd like to add this piece in too, because, you know, self-care, you know, is so extremely important, especially in prep for conversations like this, right? You know, when you have a strong mind, you become aware of what's around you. And then when you're aware of the things around you, you are empathetic. And when you're empathetic, you kind of gain an openness where you can have the ability to have these conversations, you know, like we're having today. You know, it's all really ultimately starts with each of us, you know, your personal building and understanding your personal brand and your personal story, and you know, being open to learn others' stories, but then to share your own.
I think for me, it's been kind of seeing where I fit into the bigger picture, because growing up, like, there were people in my family and around me who were openly racist. And I always prided myself in, like, I'm not like that. I'm not like them. Like, when we talk about racism, it's not about me, because, like, I'm an open, wonderful, loving person. And, you know, that stuff doesn't matter to me. And then kind of recognizing now how I fit in and how the parts that I do play, and like how the institutional racism around me, like how that's lifted me up and helped me without me even realizing. And like that, just because I'm not openly racist in the way that I was taught to think of racism doesn't mean that I don't play a part in all of this and have a way that I can help and I can change things. That was a big kind of wake up for me, is like, no, this is still about you. It's not just those people over there that say mean things. Like, it's so much more than that.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I really like what you said, Erica, and a lot of the speakers today, that it's on us, right? It's on you to do that work. It's not looking to your coworker or your neighbor or your friend who is in a minority group, no matter what that minority group might be, to teach you about that. If they're willing to lend an ear, that's wonderful, but it's not their responsibility to fix the systemic racism, to fix, you know, someone being prejudiced against someone who is gay, LGBTQ+. It's not, it's on you. It's on you. You might have grown up with it around you. It might sway your decisions or your wording on certain things, that's on you to correct. And I love that so many people here in this group are really taking responsibility. Robert said the same thing. As a white man, how do I fit in here? How do I help? And it's just something that I constantly question as well. So I love like this group of people. It's so good. Thanks for bringing us together. I really appreciate it.
I wanted to add something, if I could, to the comment before. I think it was Erica. What I really appreciate about that too was just recently I was in another group, and something that struck me that's really stayed with me the last few days is sort of this idea that just because we're in a group like this, or just because we're willing to have these conversations, or to put ourselves out there for to speak out and to be involved, it doesn't make us any better. We're not better white people for doing this. We just made different choices. And that's, I think, really important. Something that I'm starting to realize is there is really no difference between me and another white person who, doesn't think racism exists right now. We still are all part of the same culture and the same social, views. It's really that my choices are different. So I can't distance myself from that. So I just wanted to share that. And Erica's comment, it sort of raised that for me.
Yeah, I do think distancing is I really, really want to distance myself from racism, and like with every fiber of my being. But I've realized that, one example that connects with, Daria and a couple other folks. Like I actually now believe that we all have to admit and understand how a bias works in us to get anything done. Like your organizations have to do it. You have to be able to talk with your colleagues about it. We have to be able to ask ourselves, what am I not seeing? What point of view? Where's a bias that of my own that's playing out in this? And it's we've used the word responsibility, and I do feel like we are responsible, even though we didn't create it literally, but now we're perpetuating it. And I can think of things that happened to me 2 days ago where I was like, oh, there's a bias, it's walking across my brain, I've got to one of my stories is walking behind two young men in Dover, a Black young man and a white young man. They had hoodies on, and drug dealer walks across my brain. And I'm like, what is that? But we have to be able to see it happen. That's the problem with implicit bias, is it's unconscious. So it's kind of a problem till it comes out. And then when it comes out, it's even more of a problem, but at least you can face it. Yeah.
I think that might be a nice segue to set up the next exercise. Michelle, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'm gonna explain this, and then I'm gonna drop some directions in the chat, so it'll go with you off into your Zoom rooms. We've been talking among ourselves, the panelists and Lori, about the proverbial Thanksgiving table moment. Sort of what happens when you're with friends or family and something gets said, and you're sort of in this place, like, how am I going to respond? What am I going to do? And so what we want you to do in your groups is, some of you probably, when I'm even saying that, something comes right to mind, like a real moment. And some of you might have to dig a little bit, but take a little bit of time and talk about a real moment that you faced where your choice was to talk about race and racism or not. And pick one that you can dig into. And then the person whose story it is can share a little bit about that story and share more detail. And then for each of you, the other folks in the group, share what you think you would have done in that moment, and also share what you hope you would have done in that moment. For me, sometimes it's two different things. And I aspire to do what I hope to do more and more. and then just have a conversation about like what feels like something you could do. Like, you know, maybe you know, Dawn says, you know, I would have done that, and I'm like, that's a great idea. I actually feel like I could do that. So you might get ideas from each other in the conversation. So I'm gonna while Lori is doing all the Zoom room stuff, I will stick this into chat just so you have a sense of the conversation. And I know how these things work. You're going to talk about what you need to talk about no matter what. But this is here to give you a guide, and try and make sure you focus on race and racism. Try and stick there. Sometimes we kind of divert off to other things, but try and make that your focus. And we'll come back in, how long do we have?
Let's give them like 25 minutes. But hold on, I'm having technical difficulties. Hold one moment.
I don't think we're allowed to have a Zoom meeting without a technical difficulty. I think it's actually illegal to do that.
Yeah, 100%.
You might be right.
And what I might do, each of you might want to just copy what Michelle has put in, because I believe once you go over to the breakout session, it'll get rid of that chat, I believe, until you return.
Oh, okay. Is that that's probably a different version of Zoom than I have. Mine.
If you all have the chat opened before she moves over, it should just stay there as well. So definitely copy it, but
we need multiple strategies. So
there you go.
Just to make sure.
Yeah.
Difficult conversations about Zoom.
All right. So while Lori's doing this, I want to I guess I want to connect to something that Angel and Greg said. Both of you mentioned vulnerability, and one of the patterns that I've seen happen and I have participated in is that people will share stories, and the people of color in the space will share pretty deeply, and then the white folks will share in a kind of academic, more surfacey way. And it's this pattern that I've seen over and over again, and I will watch myself do it and look back and go, why did I do that? Like, I know that can happen. It's just, so it's, I guess I want to point out that that's a pattern that can happen, and sometimes really like getting in touch with your own vulnerability, and as Jermaine said, connect emotionally to the conversation. So I lift up that group agreement because of that pattern.
I think within our group we had a lot of good conversation, and you know, one of the things that came up was, you know, dealing in those moments, but also dealing with like kind of a generational respect aspect of things as well. So that was something that that came in within our group, and how to have those conversations. And you know, at the end of the day, I think, you know, kind of being realistic in our conversations when we're having them was something that I think it's just important to ultimately to do. I'm not sure. We had a lot of stories, and they were all really, really good ones. So I think, I know Carrie, you had kind of spoke up with us a lot, and I would love, if you were willing, to kind of share maybe something you gained.
Oh, share what part?
Just something you felt that you gained from the group.
I thought it was great. I was explaining how my my mom falls as far on the opposite side of things politically, and everything as you can get from me. And so when she brings things up, I'll be a little bit more blunt with her. But my mother-in-law, when she says things that are inappropriate, I'm more patient and questioning. And our conversation, you know, it was brought up that if you were more curious as to why they use terms and phrases, and you ask them, and, you know, coming kind of from curiosity, that it may actually forward the conversation. So it was very eye-opening to realize how patient I am with a mother-in-law, not patient with my mom. So working on having those conversations in a more open and polite manner may help her in some way. So that is really what I took from it, is being a little more and a little less heated.
Yeah, and you'll be empowered as well, right?
Yeah.
You know, because you're able to have more in-depth conversation with your family members. So
yeah, that would be lovely. And thank you very much.
Thanks for sharing.
I wanted to chime in about the generations thing. I've thought a lot about that, and I've done a little work with people who work in healthy aging. And one of the things I asked them is, and this may sound naive, I'm like, is there anything about you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Like, why is there anything about older people not learning? And they're like, no. It's like, I mean, if someone has dementia, that, you know, that's a different thing. But if someone is just older, there's no reason for us to not stay curious and keep them in the conversation. And in fact, the more I've learned about trauma, the more I want to. My mother grew up in Meridian, Mississippi, and so we're reading Cass together, and I think she saw some traumatic things and stood by and did nothing during some traumatic things, and needs to heal from that before she dies. You know, it's sort of like there's work to be done for everybody. And I think sometimes when we let older folks off the hook, we're also leaving them out of the liberation game that we all need to be participating in too.
So we had an example too within our group where you know, that there was a moment to have a conversation that maybe was missed, but then there was a conversation with children, you know, after the fact. So maybe that moment wasn't right to have the conversation with, you know, with a family member, but then, you know, to share and share it, you know, with your family, your kids, these are our future, you know, the things that maybe upset you about the conversation, or just to talk about it. You know, it didn't have to necessarily happen in that moment, but it happened at the right moment that it needed to. So, you know, I think that don't ever discount if there's an opportunity to have a conversation that may have been missed, you know, just move along and share elsewhere. You know, there's other opportunities that are always going to come up. So I feel like, you know, don't beat yourself up if something doesn't happen in the moment. When you feel that emotion, when you're connecting to that moment, you know, just share amongst your family, and, you know, as things come along, and when you have that opportunity to.
Yeah, Latanya, that came up in our group as well, especially around children. It was one of the stories there. And one of the ideas that came up was to still make, you know, not have that big conversation in that moment around your kids if it's really not appropriate, but still saying out loud and letting that person know, I disagree with this. No, that's not okay. That's not my point of view. And then shutting the conversation down for the time being. And again, pulling those, you know, younger kids aside at a different time and saying, you know, there was a disagreement that I had with your aunt or your uncle or your grandmother today, and here's my feelings on it. You know, and explaining to them why something was right or why something was wrong, or, you know, anything like that. Having that conversation at their level, which I think I don't know if any of you saw, but Nickelodeon a couple months ago did a really good show basically on how to talk to your kids about it. And they did a little bit of talking to the kids about it, which was really nice.
I agree also, Latanya, but I think it's important to do some modeling for your children even in the moment. So I would be in favor of saying something at the moment, maybe not the big conversation, but then having the larger, more robust conversation with your kids afterwards.
One of the things that I shared is I'm very lucky that I have a very active sophomore in high school. She's part of our school district's DEI committee that is working to change the curriculum in our school district to be inclusive. And since she was very young, she has been educating me on all sorts of issues. And so, thank you, Michelle. She is. My favorite is when when any of her grandparents makes a comment, I just sit back and watch, because that girl has more power and more ability to sucker them into saying things or to getting them to listen to her, because she's one of their beloved grandbabies, right? Mm-hmm. And so it gives her tremendous power that it comes from her as a youth. And, you know, I mean, I grew up in a home where I didn't know that other people judged people for looks, for religion, for wealth. It wasn't until I was being judged harshly by others that I had some pretty shocking awarenesses of some of those things. And there's a series, I forget what it's called, Soul of a Nation, I started watching. Mm-hmm. And in every episode, they have a section where this woman is asking the others when they became aware of the fact that they were Black and that in American society that made them somehow different. And it brings me back to my being made very aware of the fact that I was Jewish, and Jewish was different and wrong according to the people around me. And so I don't know if that's where my frame comes from or if it comes from other things. It's part of where I come back to recognizing I need to check my own bias. But I think the conversations that we have with our kids from when they're teeny tiny about loving people and accepting people and finding ways to look for the good is what's critical. And with my parents, I don't try to navigate this with my in-laws because they're my in-laws and that's not my role. But with my own parents is giving them books and saying, read this. And so that's been really good. My parents have really taken that on. They're being, you know, hit from all sides because all of their grandchildren are incredibly progressive and liberal and pushing them to be as inclusive and loving as possible. So, you know.
I took some notes here. It's something, as we think about having difficult conversations, we often think about difficult in the words that we say and having the right words. What also makes it difficult, extremely difficult, is receiving, right? These are conversations. These aren't just monologues that we get to have with people saying how wrong they are, right? Or how much we don't agree with them. And sometimes when we talk about empathy, and this is very hard because we expect to receive some empathy when we share our own stories, but not willing to give a whole lot of empathy, right? As we're talking to some of these folks that feel this way or think this way. And I always talk about this law of reciprocity, right? It's hard to expect someone to give us something that we're not willing to give to them, right? So we say, oh, empathize and understand where I'm coming from, but we close our eyes and our ears when they want to tell us where they're coming from, even if it's something we don't agree with, right? And it's hard because it feels like they're justifying their position. That's a hard thing to listen to. Someone saying, oh, this is why I'm racist, right? Like, you know, but if we don't give them the space to show empathy and maybe we don't have to agree with them, but we have to listen to them and say, they're humans, right? This is what empathy is. We put ourselves in their shoes, and we can probably even admit that, man, if I was exposed to what they were exposed to, if there's a narrative that I heard all my life, then maybe I would have some racist views, right? And so kind of meeting them where they are, but it's just kind of, we should go first. As leaders, let's show the courage to say, okay, go ahead, share with me. Where are you coming from? And I think you'll find that once you give people space, they'll give you space. And then you can say, all right, well, let me share where I'm coming from. And let me explain my story. But if we're not open to listening to them, they're not going to be open to listening to us. So we don't show a little bit of understanding. Not that we agree. Again, I want to stress that we can understand without agreeing. And we can understand yet and still challenge them to be better and to do better. But we can listen a little bit. We can show a little empathy, even though it's hard to hear at times, even though we think we may think they don't deserve empathy, but we all deserve a little bit of empathy, right? Yeah.
I think building on that, what Jermaine just shared, I think is so crucial. And it's one of the things that came up with in our scenario, which was Brian, he had to sneak off and pick up his child who one of our conclusions in our group is that the children will educate the grandparents. I think that was pretty much a universal theme, but but his son's only less than a year old, so it's got a little ways to go, a couple weeks. But his parents were saying that they were going to make they're making a trip, and they were going to make a big detour to visit Stone Mountain and see this, you know, big Confederate monument. And he was just appalled, and he's a lawyer, so he went through all the facts and figures, and he won the case, but he lost the you know, but he didn't. His parents went anyway and wanted to show him pictures afterwards, and like didn't have any impact on them or the kind of impact he wanted to have. So partly, I think it was Lauren that actually asked, like, well, what would you like to have the outcome to have been? What would you have liked to have said in retrospect if you had the chance to do it again? And he said, yeah, I guess maybe I would have asked more questions about where they were coming from, and trying to understand that a little bit more. And I know that resonated for me and some of the stuff I've been trying to work on, where, you know, I've learned that facts aren't going to do the job when it comes to these conversations. I can reel off a bunch of stuff. People now have all kinds of facts that they'll just reel off at me. But I have to try and figure out what's their experience. Where's that connecting to them? Why are they feeling that way? And then the thing I've been discovering, which is really painful and I don't like it, but I think it's helpful, is to try and figure out in that story, what can I relate to? You know, is there something I genuinely as a white person can be like, oh, I understand where that's coming from, so that I can then tell the story about how I changed, right? You know, but I have to be able to connect first, and not just be over here and say, hey, it's like this. I have to be able to say, yeah, I totally understand. I remember thinking that and I felt that way. And then I had this experience where I suddenly realized, no, that wasn't true. I really see something different now because of that. And this is what happened to me. But I need to make that connection to have it be effective. Now, I also agree with what somebody else said earlier, which is sometimes you just got to say, hey, no, that's not the right thing. And you might not have the opportunity to go further with that conversation. And that is valuable for everyone who's around the Thanksgiving table to hear, oh, maybe there's another view of this. So
I want to chime in on that and just say that this is the last couple of years, especially as things that just feel like they've gotten tighter and tighter, you know, in the hyper partisanship. The hardest thing for me is the flyby situations, like we're just sitting out here on the deck and having a glass of wine, and then suddenly, boom, it's like, and those are the worst. And so what I started doing is I actually was like, all right, who do I know I don't want to lose? Like, who do I know I need to keep? I have to keep my brother, you know. I want to keep in relationship with him, and I don't want it to be one that I avoid. There's another in-law family member who I don't think I'm gonna work very hard with. I never see them, and I'm just not gonna fight on Facebook, you know. But it did make me decide, all right, if you're not doing that, you're leaning in over here. And I, you know, I think that I read something, I think it was called, you know, do you ever stick up for me? It's like, if white people aren't talking to their own white people, who else is going to do it? You know, we have to lean in, because we're going to hear stuff that people won't say in front of other people. So I had to ask myself, who do I love and I want to keep? And now they're getting the big push from, from Michelle. So.
You just brought up something interesting too. Done. 1 second. I just want, if the panelists, after you talk, Don, if you guys could talk a little bit about managing it on social media versus managing it in person, and kind of what your experience or suggestions are with that. That would be, I think, maybe interesting to the group. But Don, what were you going to say?
I just wanted to say that we might have been in different rooms, but so much of the same kinds of conversations happened. So there's a lot of universal things that are going on. But in our group, Jermaine, we did talk about how easy it is to shut down how easy it is to just tune out or to walk away and to not engage. And that right now, it might be the best that we can do in some of these circumstances is just to stay present and to speak the truth from where we are today, because we all have our talking points, and we talked about that too. And then we're just talking heads going back and forth, and staying present and recognizing what's happening in my body, and then responding to them as another human being and finding those connections. I love that, because we are all connected, and trying to find that common ground is just such a lovely place to come from. But thank you.
Yeah, and just a part of that, we have to avoid, it's not a them and us, just because we have this view that we think we are progressive, and that suggests I'm ahead of you in this journey. And so we have a tendency to want to come into this conversation, well, I'm going to show you what's right. And I love what you just said, Dawn, and I think Latanya also touched on it, we are all humans. We are all on a journey. And if I do the work of self-care, of knowing who I am, then I can enter into that difficult conversation with you and hopefully not take it personally, but recognize it is just a conversation, and I'm hearing your opinion and I'm understanding your journey. And hopefully that gives space for you to understand mine. We may never see eye to eye on something, but you have made a difference just by giving space to say, I just want to know you. I see you, I hear you. And sometimes you just got to leave it there.
Angel, I agree. Oftentimes we enter these conversations with motives that are out of our control, like changing someone's mind, right? We can't control that. We can't change people's mind. We can't change people. And if we go into these conversations with, I'm going to tell you how you're wrong and I'm right, and you're thinking the wrong thing, they're not ever going to be receptive to that. I don't care. You could be 100% right, but if that's your motive, tell me how wrong I am, I'm going to shut down. I'm going to get defensive, and my pride is just not going to let me listen to you, right? Let alone like facts that you have, right? I'm just like, it's not going to do it. But we can go into these conversations with the shared goal of learning from one another, expanding our perspective. That's something that we can control. But we can control, and I think this goes back to kind of meeting people where they are, not where we want them to be. Sometimes we just get so frustrated because we're like, how can you think this, and you should be here, and they're just not there. And we got and like you said, Angel, we're all on a journey here. We're all in different spots on that journey. We got to meet people where they are, and that's difficult sometimes, but it's the reality, right? I think.
I also think that it's hard to admit, as smart, accomplished people, how much we've been taught that's wrong. I mean, all of us, we've all been taught some really, really wrong stuff. And the more I learn, the more I'm like, whoa, so I don't have anything wise to say about the social media stuff. My talents aren't there. So I would love to hear someone else comment on that part. But I do think that being intentional about the people you want to connect with and making a plan. I'll just share one other piece about my brother. When he sent me an email, and it took me like 2 weeks to respond. And I said, thank you for writing me about this. I'd love to talk, but I want to do it in person. I don't want to keep going on email. But when I see you next, I'd love it if we could go on a long walk and talk. And we did, and it was good. It wasn't horrible, and it wasn't, we don't amazingly line up 100% either, but it felt humane in a way that some of the typing doesn't feel humane to me.
Mm-hmm. So if I could speak on the social media versus kind of the in-person, my race shows up in a room before I do. And, you know, before people have that opportunity to really get to know me. And so on social media, one thing that I love doing is sharing the parts that people don't know about me. So that's how I leverage and use my social media, because, you know, people will see me, you know, but they won't understand kind of the things that I'm passionate about, or, you know, even the struggles or my beliefs. And so, you know, that's kind of like how those two things go for me. You know, you know, race shows up again, you know, really before I do anywhere. And social media is really that outlet for me. So people that don't know or understand me have a better understanding of the individual I am, the human that I am, instead of looking at the color first.
I would like to chime in about social media conversations. I feel like it can be both very positive and very negative. The positive, I think it gives, like you said, that people kind of that platform to maybe share who you are and the things that you care about, or even share the things that you're learning. That's something that I'm experiencing with kind of a broader audience, where sometimes the conversations you have day to day, these things just don't come up all the time. So sometimes it's hard to just like interject, unless you're really like talking about an experience you had, or a book you read, or, you know, the protest that you went to. But your social circles, especially in the past year, are a lot more limited. So I feel like in one way it can connect you to people who are like-minded. I've found that there are people that I don't see in my normal life that have had very similar, a very similar kind of growth time that I've had, and we've connected a lot, shared ideas a lot, and that has been very empowering. The other side of that has also happened, where I think you get negative comments and disagreements from people that you wouldn't normally have these conversations with, or you don't see all the time, and you're like, oh, that's where they stand. And that, obviously people know this is a huge issue with social media, is that people get rid of their filters, which, you know, can be, it's good in some circumstances, but it can be very negative, and it can be damaging as well. But it kind of shines the light a little bit more on some people, that you're like, oh, I didn't realize that, because normally we just have like a lighthearted conversation, or we're in this circle, you know, social circle where, you know, these conversations don't come up. So I have definitely seen both the positive and the negative of social media, just in terms of like finding like-minded people, but also realizing who is on the other side of things. So.
I have a bit of a cynical view of social media, because, you know, you sign on to the platform, it's not your platform. You don't control what you see. You know, Facebook is notorious for their algorithms, and they change them. So maybe 5% of your people who like you see what you post at any given time. It is a very small amount. So it's, you know, it's one of those things, so that's why it becomes like an echo chamber. I don't think that means you should, you make the decision if you want to be on it or not, or what you post on there. But I think part of it is it's very engineered. There's a lot of stuff out there that is engineered to be seen by certain people and that share things. So it's really, it's, you know, it's got a lot of, you know, there's pros and cons to it. You know, your mom can see what you're doing, but at the same time, it really isn't sort of what you think it is. You're not controlling it in any way. And you can post whatever disclaimers you want about Facebook can or cannot do something. None of that works. It's their platform, it's their rules, it's their terms of engagement. So I just think sometimes you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt, because they're all kind of like that. And you know, but you know, in as much as I'm a Twitter junkie, it is also a cesspool. So you just have to kind of know what you're getting into. But yeah, I think I think social media can be a very dangerous place. And I think it can be a really ugly place. There's a lot that gets shared. I'm a former journalist, so when I see stuff that gets shared that I know is from a junk site and people are quoting it like it's real news or something, and I gotta walk away because there's more of that out there than me. So, but anyway, sorry, it's my 2 cents. I can't help. I'm a communications person, so I can't help myself.
So
Yeah.
I think maybe, oh, Rob, did you want to say a few words?
Just very, very, very briefly, I think that, yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to so much matters about relationship with these conversations, and what level to engage in and how and what actually potentially the collaborative outcome could be, right? So, figuring out what those relationships are going to be, and how I'm going to engage with people based on that is a really big deal. So that affects social media. So it's, for me, the interaction on social media about topics that I really that I want a meaningful dialogue about, I don't do that. Just because it's just too easy to, there's that distance, you don't see each other, all the stuff that I find helpful in these conversations of human interaction with our body language and all the other things that come with it. So for me, I don't feel like those conversations are productive. At the same time, it's been a great way to share information. It's been a great way to get ideas out. It's been a great way to, was described earlier about, sharing who you are in a more, bold way. And just one little tiny side note. Yeah, I realized about a year ago, it's like, oh, my race enters the room before me as well. But the effect is very different, right? But I'm always perceived in a certain way. And I have those, and I just realized, like, having moved up to New Hampshire, I'm suddenly like, oh, right, I'm with all these white people, right? And I'm a white person. And so they think of me, in a different way than if I looked like something else. So anyway, just a side note.
I love it. I'll share just a really quick success story with social media, because I typically have not had a lot of success with any sort of social media interaction, and I usually sort of avoid it, or let other people that know me kind of chime in and educate the person that maybe is trying to stir up a little bit of trouble. But there was a gentleman that I went to high school with that had shared something, and I just couldn't not make a comment, but I did it in a very in a kind, compassionate way, where I was sharing my own vulnerability with it and asking him some curious questions about it. And we ended up having a wonderful dialogue. I feel like it should be shared widely, because we actually had very, very different perspectives, and it was all about race. And we ended up coming to a place where we didn't necessarily completely agree with each other, but we could certainly see one another's perspective. So it was a win at the end of the day, but it also consumed up way too much of my time and was probably not really worth the effort at the end of the day. I could have been more productive with myself, but I felt like it was a win. But what I want to do, since we've only got 4 minutes left, is I want to just turn it over to Latanya real quick. At the end of this session, we are going to, or I will share resources with you via email, so that you'll have resources that have been identified as helpful, that you can access and utilize after today. The session's been recorded. Once the recording has been cleaned up and edited, that will be sent to you, as well as an evaluation. But Latanya, do you want to say anything about the resources that you've pulled together that we're going to share with the group?
Yeah, so there's a variety of videos that I've kind of put together with some books that have been just beneficial to and providing some kind of the continued education piece, right? That learning and that self-development and awareness. And there's little blurbs from like a minute little video that Procter & Gamble has shown and shared, 2 videos including Emmanuel Acho, which is about having uncomfortable conversations with a Black man, where he speaks to individuals like Roger Goodell and Matthew McConaughey. They have, one-on-one conversation about these things. And then again, it's different levels in the resources you'll receive, but at the end of the day, they're there for you as you all continue on your journey. And I just want to put myself out there. If there's anything that you guys ever want to have a conversation about, I just hope that you feel, I am here as a resource, as someone that you can speak with. And so I think that's really where I'll leave it. Lori, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to.
Oh, thank you. Is there any final thoughts from Michelle, Rob, or Jermaine?
It's great to be with you all. Yeah.
I'll make the same offer as Latanya. If I can support you in this journey in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to have these types of conversations and impact where we can. So thank you all.
I echo the same all around. It's wonderful to be with you all and to have these conversations. And I feel more encouraged as time goes on here in the Seacoast with the number of folks who are willing to have these conversations, a lot more than I suspected. So, and also if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to have those conversations as well.
So in closing, I'm just going to say that on the social media thing, please go like Leadership Seacoast Facebook page. I can't go without giving that shameless plug. We also will be accepting applications for the class of 2022 later this year. So I know there's a lot of folks here today that have not actually participated in the Leadership Seacoast program. If you would like more information about that, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Check out our website. And soon maybe we can have a coffee chat and I can tell you all the reasons why you should join Leadership Seacoast. To the panelists, thank you so much. I so appreciate your wisdom and time. Good night, everybody. Happy St. Patrick's Day.